They said it was a meme. They said it was a Demon Slayer clone. They said it would be axed. But 100 chapters and 3 million circulating copies later, with no anime in sight, Kagurabachi proceeds closer and closer to solidifying itself as a true shonen masterpiece. 2 years ago, I watched Attack on Titan as my first ever anime, and I did not think it was possible for any other story to captivate me that way ever again. Since then, I've consumed a lot of anime and manga with the hopes of finding a series that could reproduce the feeling Attack on Titan gave me. The week-by-week theory crafting of Jujutsu Kaisen back in 2024 definitely did a good job, but for the most part, nothing even came remotely close, with the recent exception of Kagurabachi. The first 2 arcs were thrilling and very enjoyable with lots of mystery, but it wasn't until the Swordbearer assassination arc and all the jaw-dropping twists that came with it that I realized I'd already found exactly what I was looking for. Every week I read the chapter the moment it's released and the theory cogs immediately start turning the same way they did back in Prime JJK. The ever-growing pile of questions, the unbelievable plot twists, the devastating characters and powers, as well as the captivating history of the Kagurabachi world had already managed to convince me and many others that this story would be the next in a decently sized line of anime-manga masterpieces. And yet it has achieved this success in only 100 chapters with no mention of an anime adaptation, which is incredibly impressive. Sure, it's nothing we haven't seen before. I mean, by JJK's 100 chapter mark, I estimate it had roughly 4.5 million copies in circulation, but that was with season 1 literally around the corner, and just look at what Jujutsu Kaisen became after getting the anime. My point is, Kagurabachi is looking more and more like the future of Shonen Jump, and based on how much stock Shueisha seem to be placing in it, I think they agree. But the point of this video is not necessarily to look forward, but more so to look back on Kagurabachi's truly generational 100 chapter run so far, and explore what exactly makes this manga so incredible. So as always, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get straight into it. Kagurabachi's first few chapters and first arc in general were by no means underwhelming, but at the time of their release, we had absolutely no idea just how big of a mystery box Hokuzono was setting up. It wasn't clear at the time, but every detail and event in those first chapters were very thoroughly setting things up as part of Hokuzono's very well-prepared plan for this story, which is exactly why it's making me feel the same way I felt about Attack on Titan. There is a mystery set up early on that you naturally want answers for, but you still think you have a decent idea where it's going, until you progress more and more and everything starts getting further and further from your expectations. It seems like nothing more than a simple revenge story of a boy wanting to hunt down the criminal group that murdered his war hero father and reclaim the 6 enchanted blades that they stole from him. We were given the context of there being a big war that his father effectively ended up making these 6 all-powerful weapons for out of rare spirit energy enhancing ore called Daten Seki. Again, this doesn't really sound like anything out of the ordinary for a shonen manga, and you can absolutely see the influence of iconic series like Bleach, Naruto, Attack on Titan, and yes, even Jujutsu Kaisen woven throughout. Now, many people believe that the first villain of the series, Genichi Sojo, was actually the reason for the series not being axed, and it seeing a massive surge in popularity during its early days, which I don't necessarily disagree with, because throwing the readers straight into a high-stakes fight against a wielder of one of these 6 blades was a very effective and kind of surefire way of keeping everyone's attention, which was obviously helped by Hokuzono's unreal battle artwork and paneling. Some say if it wasn't for pressure of being axed, Hokuzono might not have rushed the climax of Sojo's arc and killed him so early on. Many people to this day actually do just love Sojo as a character and wanted to see more, but to be honest, I think his ending was ideal and necessary. I think for characters like Sojo, they are loved and the reader maintains an interest in them because they are gone, which leaves you wanting more. If Sojo had lived and remained with us to this day, he may not actually be as appreciated as he is right now. Anyway, the fast pace of the action and storytelling, while not feeling too rushed and also not revealing too many mysteries, are in my opinion one of Kagurabachi's biggest strengths. The first arc in isolation is very fun and very enjoyable, but definitely not my favourite in the series, not even close. But ever since the Kyoto Hotel and now the Kamanabi invasion arc, I've actually just realised how crucial the early parts of the manga are, because there is a fair bit of foreshadowing and setup that lots of us didn't really notice at the time, and some of which is still yet to be explored. Once you actually catch up with the manga and go back to do a full reread, you will see that Hokuzono definitely has a very clear direction for the story, and he knows exactly how things should play out, which again is exactly how I felt when watching Attack on Titan. For example, in chapter 6, when we get that one single panel of the Seiti War, you will notice that you can actually see lightning, pillars of ice, and you can even see black feathers in the top left corner. For all we know, sorcerers and enchanted blades whose abilities are yet to be revealed are already on display in that single panel from chapter 6. The most recent example of Kagurabachi's long-term setup and payoff is Ikuto Hagiwara, commander of Azami's elite squad that became the anti-Cloud Gouger squad. The ACG squad were all gassed up and then immediately got deleted in one single chapter, Levi squad style, but having an event as shocking as the ACG's crippling failure that early on definitely helped keep the stakes high for Sojo vs Chihiro and just keeping the reader locked in general. Over 80 chapters later though, Ikuto Hagiwara, who was the only survivor besides my glorious King Kazane, actually made his return to the series, and he was really not happy that the enemy was inside his base of operations. Now sure, Ikuto's return was definitely expected and inevitable, which is rare for Kagurabachi, but absolutely no one was ready for how he would return. The one time that Hokuzono actually made something predictable, he had to go beyond and somehow surpass everyone's expectations anyway, because Ikuto returning as a man so mentally traumatized that he went full schizophrenic and became even stronger by subconsciously animating his dead childhood friend and ex-colleague, who is now just a voice inside his head. Like, consider the sentence I've just said. Now that is ridiculous. No one saw that coming. I'm not sure that my explanation of that even makes any... Actually, no. I don't think Hokuzono's explanation of that makes any fucking sense, to be honest, but it is truly a unique and inventive and amazing way of bringing back a character that we all knew was going to return at some point. And is a very good example of how Kagurabachi exceeds expectations week after week. Another admittedly theory-based example is Char and the Kiyonagi clan with their natural healing ability. Char's mother was the supposed sole survivor of a massacre that happened just after the war ended. The current theory is that Char's mother was from the island because everything points to this massacre actually being the malediction. Sojo's use of Char's healing flesh to try and harness Datanseki could also explain how both the island warriors were able to use Datanseki without dying, and potentially how Kunishige was able to create the blades in the first place. You can go even deeper into that and theorize that the Sword Saint, Yura, and even Yukisada, due to his healing ability, could all be islanders themselves. Whether you agree or disagree with the specifics of the theory isn't at all the point though. The point is that there is lots of theory crafting potential with lots of dots that need to be connected, because what we do know is that these dots do connect in some way or other, even if right now we can't figure out exactly how. It's easy enough to tell that almost every passing detail Hokuzono weaves into the story has significance to the story in some way. I know that sounds like a very grass is green statement, but you know what I mean. Char's clan, the island's royal family that was deposed after the war, Yura saying Chihiro is too green, Yukisada saying Yura will be king, all of these things are things said and talked about in passing that I suspect will be very important moving forwards. Another example that hasn't been properly explored yet is how the theatre production Hirohiko Crashes potentially depicts the events of the Seiti War, and could just be giving us a lot of answers without us even realizing it. And then there is the more simple but enjoyable foreshadowing, like how Azami's hand was crippled during his debut, and yet he clenched his fist and punched regardless without even noticing the pain until later. Given the recent events between Azami and Yura, I'm sure you can see what I'm getting at here and what I think this foreshadows. While we're on the topic of Azami and Hokuzono setting up future events though, I do want to discuss what I think is one of Kagurabachi's greatest strengths, but also greatest weaknesses. Yeah, I am gonna be fair here, alright? I don't think it's all great. That's a lie, I definitely think it's all great, but whatever, it still has a little weakness. Deep writing and plot twists and such are all awesome, but at the end of the day, I do just want my shonen manga to have cool fights, hype moments, strong characters, and yes, aura. There is absolutely no shame in wanting all those things, and Kagurabachi definitely does deliver, for the most part. One of the things Hokuzono does that keeps myself and many other readers engaged and hooked on the series is setting up characters and potential stories that he knows we desperately want to see, but then kind of just edging us. The best example is of course my off-screen goat, Togo Shiba. He has so much setup and exposition, as well as very deliberate statements glazing how he is the pinnacle of sorcery, even more so than Azami. And similar to Azami, Shiba was incredibly close to Kunishige Rokuhira, so I'm sure he feels a lot of guilt about his death, as well as any harm that now befalls his son, Chihiro. Now, both Azami and Shiba have a lot of narrative set up and are characters that I'm certain will have their moments to really shine in the future, but as of the 100 chapter mark, we haven't really gotten a proper taste. I mean, they do call him the off-screen king for a reason. I have full faith that Hokuzono is deliberately making us wait for characters like Shiba, Azami, Hiyuki, and even Yura to be fully explored, but what I really hope is that Hokuzono doesn't make the same mistake as Oda, where you set up characters like Mihawk or Dragon with inevitable importance in the story and top-tier strength, but then don't actually show us anything significant or hype until the final stretch. I would still like to see these characters have fights and full interactions on screen without cutting away every 3 pages. I think the best example of this, in my opinion, is, yes, Gojo and Sukuna. But Gojo especially, because his big moment where we finally got to see him go all out was in his fight against Sukuna, but he still had plenty of build-up, cool fights, and hype moments throughout the story. I understand and really do enjoy the anticipation that Hokuzono is trying to build for these hyped up characters like Azami, Shiba, and Hiyuki, but as of Azami's recent clash with Yura being mostly off-screen, and now him being too disabled to actually have a real fight, I am starting to feel like the off-screen gimmick is just being milked a little bit. At the moment, that is probably my only criticism of this series, or even just of the Kamanabi invasion arc, to be honest. We aren't focusing on each character or fight for long enough for me to really get invested in what's going on. I think the Kyoto Hotel arc was a much better example of how everything should be paced, although I understand the invasion arc has a lot more moving pieces, so I do think Hokuzono is doing a good job managing it. It's just frustrating when you set something up and then immediately cut away, and then go back to it, but before you really develop any further, you cut away again. As a whole though, Kagurabachi manages to keep our interest by giving us little tastes of the answers we're looking for, but overall it does just remain a giant mystery box, both in terms of characters and story, which is exactly how I felt about Attack on Titan until they reach the basement. We get just enough answers to not get bored and keep our curiosity piqued, but not enough to be able to figure out the full picture, not even close. That, accompanied by Hokuzono's incredible artwork, fights, abilities, and characters, is realistically what keeps us coming back to Kagurabachi week after week, and it's also why the series has remained so consistently peak throughout its entire 100 chapter runtime as of right now. I know it's crazy, but I genuinely cannot think of a single bad chapter in this series so far. All I can say is that my investment in the story didn't truly peak until the Swordbearer assassination arc that followed the Rakuzaichi auction. The Sojo arc and the Rakuzaichi auction were the first 2 arcs of the series, and they were basically subplots that had elements of the main plot tied into them. The goal of the first arc was to save Char and take down Sojo in order to retrieve the enchanted blade. But Sojo was given the blade and worked in league with the Hishaku in order to create those temporary Datanseki weapons that would get used later on by the Hishaku. This arc also introduced the idea of true realms and how the blades bend to the will of the wielder. Similarly, the Rakuzaichi auction focused on expanding the world of sorcery and introducing characters like Hakuri Sazanami. The main focus was about taking down the auction and retrieving the Shinichi blade, which had been given to the Sazanami clan yet again by the Hishaku for a very specific purpose. Actually, it was given to them by Sojo, but it was given to Sojo by the Hishaku, so same thing. Both of these beginner arcs kind of tie to the main story in their own way, but they do each have their own final boss separate from the Hishaku and the primary plot. The Swordbearer assassination arc, the Kyoto Hotel arc, and now the Kamanabi invasion arc, though, are when you properly start getting into the story of Kagurabachi by focusing on the original blade wielders and the intentions of the Hishaku, who as of right now are definitely the main villains led by Yura. But given just how much we need to cover, how many characters are yet to be explored, and how many questions still need to be desperately answered, I don't think Kagurabachi will be ending anytime soon. I think we have at least another 100 chapters in us, maybe more. I mean, things are really kicking off right now, with Yura successfully making contact with the Sword Saint down in the dungeon, and then Azami pulling that Gojo shit. But it isn't really giving finale vibes. In fact, it feels more like the actual beginning of the story, where we finally start getting some of the bigger picture. Overall, though, it's very apparent that Hokuzono has had a solid plan for the story since the beginning, and has a very good understanding of how to balance pacing, action, and narrative. The point is, Kagurabachi is truly peak storytelling. Kagurabachi undoubtedly has some of the most enjoyable and well-written characters I've ever seen in a shonen manga, with most of them being complete badasses too. I mean, I've already covered why characters like Hiyuki, Shiba, and Azami are so interesting, due to Hokusono basically just edging us with little tastes of their aura, but then ultimately keeping them hidden away. On the other hand though, you have characters like Chihiro Rokuhira, Kiora Sazanami, Hakuri Sazanami, and of course the GOAT Seiichi Samura, who is the main focus of the current parts of the story. Sure, Sojo is very cool and enjoyable, but I do think he gets overrated in terms of his importance to the narrative. He's really not that complicated of a character, which isn't a bad thing by any means. I just think a lot of people in the fandom make him out to be a lot more than he is. When talking about Kagurabachi's best antagonist so far in the series though, the crown definitely falls to Kiora Sazanami. At least that is if you don't include Samura in the list of antagonists, which I guess he technically is, and that would make him the best antagonist, but whatever, I want to talk about Kiora. Kiora represents Hokusono's ability to write and execute a very compelling character and story, separate to that of Kagurabachi's main plot. No two antagonists or arcs are the same in this series. The Rakuzaichi's auction finale, with Kiora withstanding the influence of the Sword Saint because of his unrivaled dedication to protecting his and his family's legacy, was genuinely peak and way more interesting than Sojo in my opinion. Especially when a character like Kiora is depicted in artwork as moving as Hokusono's. Kiora's dedication and obsession with protecting the Rakuzaichi blinded him. The way he raised his children and used their literal lives as a means to protect that auction indirectly led to his own son Hakuri becoming the very thing that would destroy the auction. He could not see his own son's potential because of that blindness. He couldn't tell that Hakuri was a generational genius destined to lead the Sazanami clan to greatness because of the immense pressure that Kiora and Hakuri's siblings placed on him. Even after spending his final moments reflecting on the way he chose to live his life and the warnings that his dying wife gave him, even after realizing he did genuinely make a mistake with Hakuri, he still held strong and gave his all to protecting the Rakuzaichi there in that moment. In the end, he even found the willpower to lay down the sword despite the Sword Saint's attempts to corrupt his mind, and bear in mind, this is the strongest man and the strongest sword that we are aware of in the story trying to take over his mind. Individually, Kiora was just an incredible antagonist and character for this arc, but the entire Rakuzaichi story actually allowed for considerable growth in existing characters, and it also made room for very intriguing new characters. Hakuri's entire story is the best part of the arc in my opinion, and still some of my favourite character writing in Kagurabachi, which again serves as another example of how the Rakuzaichi arc is just another setup arc for the rest of the story, but is executed so well that it does just stand on its own as a very good arc in isolation. I mean, at first, Hakuri really did seem like a talentless bum, which was part of the reason why his twisted family neglected and tortured him. But when fighting Soya, it was revealed that Hakuri was the generational genius destined to follow in the first patriarch's footsteps and wield two different types of sorcery. Being beaten and tortured at such a young age led to him not only subconsciously reinforcing himself with spirit energy to the point where he could survive a point-blank flamebone attack to the face, but also led him to subconsciously hide the tools of his torture in the storehouse. Doing this as a kid is a feat in itself, and is the reason why he couldn't master ISO until the fight with Soya. It's because he was so occupied with maintaining his storehouse as a subconscious means of protection. Hakuri's entire story with the Ice Girl, his relationship with that girl, the final fight with his brother Soya, and his involvement in taking down the Rakuzaichi as a whole are definitely the highlights of the arc for me, and I feel like Hakuri serves as the perfect example of how well fleshed out and intriguing Kagurabachi characters can be. His writing is nothing super complex, it's not hard to understand at all. In fact, it's quite simple, but very, very effective, and it definitely made for some really fun week-by-week reactions when all this stuff was revealed. Even among all these characters, like Shiba, who are not going to be fully focused on or explored until later on in the story, get little bits of setup kind of sprinkled throughout. Yeah, okay, sure, he off-screened the entire toe, which I know I've said I don't like the off-screening bit, and I don't, but I won't pretend it didn't have its impact, like it did what Hokusono wanted it to do. It was very cool, and I love the fact that Enji hinted at Shiba's sorcery not just being teleportation, but the most interesting hint at Shiba's main themes here is when he actually returns to Enji later and encourages him wholeheartedly to just go home, forget about the Rakuzaichi, and look after his family who need him alive. He did the exact same thing with the Daruma guy. He told him to give up the shady stuff and go live a good life. So it seems to be a deliberately recurring theme for Shiba specifically that has been very subtly and infrequently hinted at. Maybe it's born from Shiba's regret of not being there for Kunishige and Chihiro when they were attacked, or for not persuading Chihiro to just live his life and not seek revenge. We won't know for sure until later when he gets explored, but I love the fact that themes are being set up and hinted at in arcs that are already rich in development and writing. You can see in these arcs that Hokuzono is always looking ahead. I could go on and on about so many characters and why I like them, but then realistically we'd be here all day, so I'm just going to talk about the GOAT now. The wielder of Tobimune, the master of Ei White Purity style, and the man who controlled the Seitei War. I am of course talking about Seiichi Samura. To me, every part of the story involving Samura so far is literally the pinnacle of Kagurabachi. Actually, no, I lied. For me, I think it's the pinnacle of fiction. It's some of the best stuff I've ever experienced. After meeting Uraha, who is also awesome by the way, let's not get that confused, he and Hakuri made their way to Seiichi Samura at Sekutsuji Temple, while Chihiro stayed behind to hold off Hirohiko, who was a newly introduced Hishaku and a victim of Yura's child grooming. Now, we all know that blind characters in anime, manga, and just fiction in general are always lovable badasses, so pretty much everyone fell in love with Samura straight off the bat. Actually, Hokuzono's greatest feat in this arc was making the readers so unbelievably quick to trust Samura in such little time. I mean, the fact he is Uraha's master, the fact he was blatantly fighting against the Hishaku forces, and the fact that we know Chihiro already knew him from a flashback made trusting him really easy. But then during the climax of Chihiro vs Hirohiko, Hokuzono nonchalantly dropped an Attack on Titan level plot twist out of absolutely nowhere. Everybody I know, myself included, read the entire page where Hirohiko outright states that Samura has had previous dealings and talks with the Hishaku, and then immediately turned the page without even thinking about it because it was just so casual. The truth is just outright stated, plain as day, in black ink on the page. But it's so easy for both the reader and Chihiro to gloss over because he was spiraling and didn't even notice. We all turned the page and then had to immediately go back and reread it after we had had some time to process what was just said. That moment and that reveal is actually when I realized that Kagurabachi was the story I had been looking for. And the events and fights that followed definitely did not disappoint either, especially all the stuff involving Uraha. At first it seemed like Samura really did kill him, but we later learned he secretly used his Phoenix ability to later revive him, and he did this in order to sever Uraha's contract to the Enchanted Blade and spare his life. Samura had only temporarily aligned with the Hishaku for the purpose of information and support, but would hunt them all down the very second his goal was complete. And that goal was to sever all of the Blade Wielder's contracts by killing and reviving them, all but himself. The Hishaku would then hold up their end of the bargain and slay the Swordmaster, which would result in Samura's death, and only Samura's death, since the lives of those contracted to the Enchanted Blades are tied to the Swordmaster's life. Samura planned to shoulder the burden of this all alone and be the sole wielder to die. But everything changed in the Kyoto Hotel arc when his daughter, Iori Samura, recovered her memories of her father after being saved from the Hishaku by Chihiro. Chihiro, better than anybody else, could actually understand and empathize with Iori, and was therefore motivated to convince Samura that his life could still be saved and that he deserved to live. As someone who lost his father, Chihiro had all the motivation he needed to get Iori her dad back. After a series of what are undoubtedly the best looking fights in the entire series so far, with some of the best panels and hype moments I've ever seen ever, Chihiro was finally able to get through to Samura. Samura was so convinced that he needed to die at the end of all of this, despite Chihiro literally offering him an alternative, which likely involved him taking on Samura's role and severing Samura's contract and then reviving him with an Aka-copied Suzuki. It wasn't until Samura gave in to his daughter's pleas and healed his eyes that he literally allowed himself to see a reason for him to keep on living. Seeing the effects of the war and all of the guilt he felt that led to him blinding himself, and how his blindness symbolized his inability to see a future where he could or deserved to live, and how healing back his eyesight to see his daughter for the first time further symbolized how, thanks to Chihiro, he could now see a reason for why he should keep on living. Yeah bro, I'm sorry, it's just peak, like absolute cinema, it's so good. When it comes to characters in Kagurabachi though, it simply isn't enough to talk about them in isolation, because one of Kagurabachi's greatest strengths is having incredible dynamics between characters. Samura's dynamic with Chihiro during their fight, and the way Samura and Iori sort of parallel Chihiro and his dad is a great example, but an even better example is the dynamic between Chihiro and Hirohiko. Hirohiko and Chihiro are both at their best when they are rivals facing off against each other. The parallels between Chihiro and Kunoshige and Hirohiko and Yura are also very interesting. Neither of them went to school, they were very sheltered kids who didn't have any friends, they are both prodigies of sorts with a unique talent for sorcery and combat, and they are both willing to kill without hesitation. The only difference between Hirohiko and Chihiro is that Hirohiko has no regard for innocent lives, whereas Chihiro kills only those who threaten innocent lives. They are very different and yet very similar, which makes their dynamic very interesting every single time they face off against each other. And yes, I know some people get defensive about this comparison, but it really does feel like a Yuji versus Mahito type of rivalry and parallel. I'm very interested to see how it develops moving forward, but like, f*** you Hirohiko, you're a bum. Some more examples of good dynamics between characters include the weird three-way rival triangle Hokuto, Natsuki, and Uraha find themselves in, Hakuri's rivalry with his older brother Soya, which I've already discussed, and more recently, the interesting dynamic between Yuki Sada and Yura that hasn't been properly explained yet. Hokuto, Natsuki, and Uraha are the perfect example though. Two of these characters have literally only been introduced during this arc, but already everyone is crazy invested in them because the stakes are so high between the three of them. High stakes means more enjoyable and hype fights right from the get-go, but the fact that three people are involved means that one of them surely has to lose in this rivalry. All three are master swordsmen who have valid reasons for wanting to kill or at least challenge the others. Hokuto wants to fight Uraha, who he knows to be a master swordsman that Kunoshige Rokuhira personally selected to wield an enchanted blade. Natsuki will want to kill Hokuto because he is the one who killed his brother. I believe Hokuto would also set his sights on Natsuki instead of Uraha due to Natsuki already being somewhat relative to Uraha back in the day, but while Uraha was resting, Natsuki kept practicing the art of swordsmanship. At least I did believe that would be the case until Uraha showed everybody exactly who he is and why he was selected by Rokuhira in the first place, by managing to not only keep up with, but fully carry his weight in the fight against Hokuto and Yura. Natsuki also has beef with Uraha though because Uraha was selected to wield Kumayuri instead of him. Uraha has no beef with Natsuki, but as someone who idolized and truly loved Kunoshige Rokuhira, he would want revenge against Hokuto for also killing him the same way that Azami does. This high-stakes rival triangle immediately made the newly introduced characters interesting, but also made everyone care about the outcome of this fight, and since it won't be settled in this arc, it will be something we can look forward to in the future. I think this is probably the best example for demonstrating how Hokuzono manages to keep readers permanently captivated and satisfied at the same time, because the actual fights themselves are so fun to read with some of the best page turners and battle artwork I've ever laid eyes on. But it's also a great example of how Hokuzono utilizes dynamics between characters to immediately make us interested in new additions to the cast. Holy glaze, I know that was an insane yap session, but it's the truth. Now, in terms of the future of Kagurabachi, well, I'll be honest, I have a flipping clue, alright? No clue at all. All I know is that we're finally putting more focus on the main story and we should start getting answers very soon now, but I genuinely don't think we're even halfway through the manga yet. There is just so much more material left to cover. Previously set up characters like Shiba, Hiyuki, and the remaining swordbearers all need to have their turn in the spotlight. We are still yet to learn the truth about the war, the truth of Daten Seki, and what happened to the sword saint that turned him from Kunoshige's most trusted friend to a murdering maniac. I'm very certain we'll get a hidden inventory style flashback arc at some point, which will likely focus on developing our understanding of Azami and Shiba's relationship with Kunoshige, as well as, his relationship to the Sword Saint as his brother-in-law, and how they made the swords, as well as all the other information that we need before the series ends. For those of you saying it's the JJK Heian era flashback stuff all over again, it's not like that at all, okay? The Heian era flashbacks would have been cool, but they were in no way needed for the reader to get the full picture of the plot of the series. How Hokuzono chooses to give us the information is completely up to him, and I trust him to do it well, but the readers will at some point need to know the answers to these questions involving the war. Context is literally crucial to the story, so yes, I do think we will get a flashback of sorts, and I think that flashback will have multiple different purposes. It could give us much needed context and answers, but it can also be used to develop other characters like Azami and Shiba and help us understand their motivations so the stakes and emotion can be higher when their time comes. And yeah, I say their time because one of them's definitely dead by the end of the series, and I think it's almost definitely Shiba. All I know for certain is that we aren't even close to reaching the end of the series, and I have a feeling it's somehow only going to get better from here. That being said though, how the hell is this massively successful manga series reached 100 chapters without any sign of an anime announcement? It genuinely has to be any day now. All we know is that Shueisha turned down Mappa and Wit Studios and supposedly gave it to Psy Games, which is a more than capable studio from what I've seen. All we need now is the official announcement, and please God, a trailer, because I know for a fact this series is gonna blow the hell up when the anime releases. I do honestly think if anything is going to be the next Jujutsu Kaisen or Demon Slayer and have a similar effect, I think it will be Kagurabachi. In terms of how I want the anime to be done though, I think a 20 to 22 episode season covering everything up until chapter 60 is the best way to go. Realistically though, we haven't got a single clue. We genuinely have no idea, which is very frustrating because I need to see this series animated immediately. Yes, this video has mostly just been insane glaze, but it's well deserved and it's my way of celebrating reaching 100 chapters of peak. Obviously I didn't have time to say everything I wanted to about this series, but I simply don't have the capacity to sit on my ass editing a 10-hour video. Instead, this is what I managed to pull together, and to be honest, I think it very nicely sums up my thoughts and highlights of the series. I hope Hokuzono stays well rested, God knows he needs it considering the demonic company that he works for, and I truly can't wait to see what he has in store for us next. He hasn't disappointed me yet, so whatever it is, I already know it's gonna be peak, I trust him. As always, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below who your favorite Kagurabachi character is, or just something like that to help the algorithm, I don't know. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in a bit.